Welcome to episode 3 of Veil Lifted, a video essay where I discuss fascinating cases that involve secrecy and discovery. For decades now, there have been rumors surrounding the Hollywood industry. From religious cults to sex cults to illegal activity, there's always been a story that makes us wonder what these celebrities are doing in their free time. Few times is the public actually privy to what happens behind closed doors. This time, we have no rumor, but rather facts coming from someone who was an integral part of a sex cult. Enter NXIVM and Allison Mack. To be noted, this case twists and turns, so in this video essay I will do my best to paint as accurate a picture as possible. Allison Mack is an actress that's best known for her role in Smallville as a character named Chloe Sullivan, as well as a series titled Wilfred, in which she was a character named Amanda. Mack earned awards and nominations for her role as Chloe in Smallville. It seemed her career was bound to take off, but in 2006 she became involved with a company that would change her life forever. NXIVM. Though Mack continued to act until 2015, she was a guest star on shows rather than a consistent character, foreshadowing her subsequent absence from the limelight. In fact, in 2011, she moved to New York to be close to the NXIVM home base. What exactly is NXIVM? NXIVM was, as it is now suspended, a multi-level marketing company based in a small area of New York near Albany. The premise of this company was to provide personal and professional development courses. The founder of NXIVM was Keith Raniere, which will be referred to as KR. It has been said that a large factor of NXIVM's charm was that KR was extremely talented at making people feel like they were the only ones in the room. Additionally, due to an IQ test he took in his youth, he had concrete evidence to prove his intelligence and wow people. KR mimicked guru-type behavior with open-ended questions and unusual routines, such as sleeping all day and working at night. Those who worked with KR noticed that he needed to give women in NXIVM permission to execute orders and simultaneously strip them of all their confidence and personality. Allegedly, members were to put blackmail or collateral information in order to keep tabs on other members and ensure they were not sharing inside information. KR's co-founder was a woman named Nancy Saltzman. Nancy Saltzman ran the Executive Success Program, a company that fit under the NXIVM umbrella and that was designed to help people, quote-unquote, discover and utilize their untapped potential.
When I first came to ESP, I had on the surface something that seemed to be like the perfect life, or a pretty good life. Like superficially, materialistically, I was very successful. I had the job, I had the dog, I had the car, I had the boyfriend, I had the blah, 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 the clothes, everything that I thought I needed in order to be okay. And yet, I couldn't stand to be with my family for more than 2 hours at a time. And the idea of being honest with even my best friend was something that was so far outside the realm of possibility that I just kind of thought you always lived your life inauthentically. And when I came to ESP, and I started to do the work in the Goals Lab, do the work in the classes, I started to transform in a way that I never expected. Like, I literally didn't know that you could spend time with someone and not be nervous. I literally didn't know that it was possible to have a week with your family where you didn't feel like leaving. I just thought that that wasn't really possible. I thought it happened in the movies. And now that's my life, that's my reality. I have an experience of my family that is nothing but joy, and it's astounding.
On the NXIVM website, that now opens with a page referring to its suspension, we have an About the Founder page in which we get information about KR. According to this page, KR, quote-unquote, has developed a series of educational models that offer integrative solutions to complex subjects such as gender, relationships, childhood development, mind-body complex, compassionate ethics, and creative expression. I highly suggest you pause to read the rest of this description. While word salads are frequently found on websites, my personal opinion is that KR chose to use the broadest terms available in order to find all types of vulnerable people that could identify with any of the terms he used. Anyway, at the bottom of this page on the NXIVM website, we are directed to KR's personal website. Interestingly, the majority is identical to the NXIVM page, except for a few sentences at the bottom where we're informed about patents and pending patents. According to Forbes magazine, reported in 2003, over 3,000 people had taken part in his courses, including Stephen Cooper, the CEO of Enron. While partaking in courses, KR expected to be referred to as Vanguard rather than his actual name. While this is a simple choice and perhaps just an alias, to me this seems like the beginning of a cult where the leader needs a title title to indicate their power. Two notable participants in the NXIVM courses were the heiresses of Seagram, the brand of whiskey, Claire and Sarah Bronfman. They will be relevant later. Continuing with NXIVM, a typical tell that the company was perhaps up to some devious behavior was the inclusion of non-disclosure agreements. In fact, Rick Allen Ross, a cult specialist, managed to get a hold of excerpts from NXIVM's secret documents. Ross then had a psychiatrist assess the content, and the psychiatrist referred to NXIVM as quote-unquote expensive brainwashing. Edgar Bronfman, the father of Sarah and Claire, in 2003 claimed the company was a cult as he had not spoken to his daughters in months and had noted their investment emotionally as well as financially. 3 years later, in 2006, Forbes published an article about the Bronfman sisters and stated that they had taken out a line of credit to lend $2 million to NXIVM. In 2009, the Dalai Lama was scheduled to visit an organization co-founded by the Bronfman sisters and KR. However, due to the bad reputation of NXIVM, the visit was postponed until later in 2009. So far, the story fits the stereotype of a company with suspicious business practices. However, the narrative takes a darker turn. There was a secret group within NXIVM. It was referred to as DOS, which is an acronym for the Latin phrase that roughly translates to Master of the Obedient Female Companions. This sect of NXIVM was a part of Allison Mack's responsibility. Though Allison Mack joined NXIVM in order to find purpose and to be with like-minded individuals who were seeking self-improvement in all categories of life, she found herself helping KR with his bizarre wants. The purpose of this sect was to find women that would be groomed to be sexual partners for KR. However, as far as the women knew, they were there for a female mentorship program. The secret group worked in the form of a pyramid where KR was vanguard at the top, with Mack as second in command. In March of 2016, in Albany, 5 women joined a secret sisterhood they believed was meant to empower women. Each of these women were part of the so-called self-help organization NXIVM. One of the participants, Sarah Edmondson, had been told that a part of the initiation was getting a small tattoo. However, this turned out to be a gross understatement. Instead, each woman was to lay on a massage table in a state of undress, and Lauren Saltzman, Nancy's daughter, commanded them to say, "Master, please brand me, it would be an honor." This resulted in a doctor using a cauterizing device to leave a brand below the hip. Reports vary on whether the brand was consistently KR's initial or a square shape. Each procedure took 20 to 30 minutes. Edmondson recalls weeping for the totality of the time and disassociating out of her body. This quote-unquote sisterhood included Lauren Saltzman as the master, telling the women to overcome what KR deemed the typical weaknesses in women: over-emotional behavior, victimization, and a lack of persistence. A few of the women stated that submission and obedience were used in order to overcome those so-called weaknesses. Apparently, at the beginning, Edmondson was under the impression that this was a quote-unquote badass bitch boot camp rather than an indoctrinating and manipulating cult. Edmondson and others stated that the master-slave dynamic was intensive as the women, or slaves, were required to respond to Master Saltzman's texts within 60 seconds or they'd have to pay for it. This payment came in the form of fasting as well as physical punishment. Additionally, it is said that KR demanded women to diet to the extreme to achieve the physique he liked best. Mack claimed that in order to become a legitimate member of the group, the women were demanded to include information that could personally damage them, including explicit photos and videos. The women were allegedly warned that the sensitive information would be leaked if they spoke of the secret group. Mack used this information in order to blackmail the women into performing services for the group, including required sexual activity with KR. KR was arrested in March of 2018 after an article that was published by the New York Times in October of 2017. The New York Times article shone a light on the DOS and their extremely questionable practices. Subsequently, in March of 2018, KR was arrested in Mexico on sex trafficking charges. 1 month later, in April of 2018, Mack was also charged with sex trafficking, as her central responsibility was to find women for KR and have them starve until they fit his ideal. Initially, she pleaded not guilty. According to a source in contact with 2 DOS former members, quote, "Mack was incredibly intimidating, cruel, and punitive," end quote. In May 2018, KR pleaded not guilty and his lawyers claimed that all that occurred was consensual. On April 8, 2019, multiple reports began coming out about NXIVM as Allison Mack finally pleaded guilty in the case of NXIVM and the sex cult. Recently, both Lauren and Nancy Saltzman pled guilty as well. In an article by The Cut published on April 8th, we received new information about the key suspects. Nancy Saltzman admitted to monitoring and tracking specific usernames and passwords of, quote, suspected moles of the group to ensure they weren't leaking details of the group's inner workings, end quote. She also confessed to destroying video footage that, quote, documented Raniere's teachings, end quote. On the other hand, Nancy's daughter, Lauren, has admitted to keeping a woman as a slave. She kept this woman, who remains anonymous, locked in a room from March 2010 to April 2012. Lauren Saltzman also confessed to using deportation as a scare tactic when the woman would not comply. Additionally, a very troubling truth has come to the surface. On top of KR's consistently required sexual partners, the prosecution found that KR documented himself engaging sexually with a 15-year-old girl. The girl then became his first slave. Prosecutors believe there was a sexual relationship with at least another child. To make matters even worse, they are also accusing him of possessing child pornography as early as 2005 all the way to 2015. Allison Mack is quoted as saying she needs to take, quote, full responsibility, end quote, for her actions and pled guilty to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy and 1 count of racketeering. She then apologized for her misguided belief in KR's teachings. As of now, Mack faces up to 20 years in prison for each count to which she pled guilty. She's scheduled to be sentenced on September 11th. The NXIVM trial is supposed to begin April 29th. If you've made it this far, you now understand how complicated this case is. My main issue in accounting where I stand is that the power dynamic remains somewhat unclear. While there's no debate that KR is guilty, even though Mack was his subordinate, she seemed to have done a significant part of the heavy lifting, as she was the one who introduced women into the cult, and she was also the one who misrepresented the cult as a women's empowerment group, which it clearly was not. Had she not done this, I'm sure KR would have found someone else to do it, but the fact that she was an actress and a celebrity, at least at the time, definitely had its own pull. Effectively, I believe that she and KR should most likely be deemed equally responsible for the matters that occurred within NXIVM. Of course, KR is solely responsible for what he did prior and on his own, but in terms of what happened with NXIVM, I believe both KR and Mack should be held close to equally accountable. This case was interesting to me because it was so layered with fraudulence and so complicated to understand. You have this basic layer of NXIVM as a self-help group, which was already cultish with its indoctrination rather than open-mindedness and growth, which is usually what self-help groups foster. Then under NXIVM, there's the secret group DOS, which is manipulative, abusive, and morally bankrupt, but this is down here, but it's also partially transparent, so we really just see the tip of the iceberg, so understanding what's underwater becomes complicated, as really the only people we have speaking about it are Mack and a couple of anonymous sources who also are relatively quiet about it. Then, on top of that, we have the sideline players that are the Saltzman women, the mother Nancy and the daughter Lauren, who partook, but not to the extent that Mack and KR partook, so they're almost like partial players that come in and come out. While this by no means is the only story about a cult, I have to say that it feels surreal to know that I could just go turn on my television, look for a streaming service that has Smallville, and I would be able to see Mack on screen. The idea that this woman, who is now a criminal, was just a regular actress until some turning point in her life in 2006 is such a bizarre concept to wrap your head around. As for KR, I genuinely believe this is only the tip of the iceberg and there's far more that is probably worse and that we have no idea about. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in into this episode of Veil Lifted. Let me know what you think down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always, and let's get right into the fan art.